This happened about 6 years ago, back when I was 23, and still thought that the worst thing that could follow you home was a bad memory. I was working a graveyard shift delivery route at the time. Nothing glamorous. Just me, a cargo van, and about 4 hours of dark highway every night between 11 and 3 in the morning. I was between apartments, sleeping on a friend's couch, somewhere in that blurry stretch of life where you're technically an adult, but nothing about your situation feels permanent. No girlfriend, no real plans. Just work, sleep, repeat. I've told this story exactly twice. Once to my older brother, who didn't say anything for a long time after I finished, and once to therapist, who wrote something down and then changed the subject in a way that felt deliberate. I don't drive that route anymore. I don't drive at night at all if I can avoid it, and I've never been able to fully explain why. Not in a way that satisfies anyone, including myself. But it started on Highway 9, out past the Pisgah National Forest in western North Carolina. And it started, like most things do, with something so small I almost didn't notice it. Let me give you the geography first, because it matters. Highway 9 in that part of North Carolina is not a road that forgives you for not paying attention. It's a two-lane state route that cuts through the Black Mountains, and once you leave the town of Black Mountain heading west, the terrain changes fast. The forest presses in on both sides. The guardrails are old and spaced inconsistently. The elevation shifts without much warning. At 11:30 at night in late October, there's essentially zero ambient light once you're past the last cluster of gas stations on the eastern edge. My route ran a loop. I'd pick up a cargo load from a distribution hub off I-40, drive west on 9 to the forest section, drop at a small regional depot near Old Fort, then turn around and come back. Round trip was about 90 minutes. I did it 5 nights a week. The van was a white Ford Transit, maybe 4 years old at that point. No rear windows in the cargo section. A radio that got maybe 3 stations reliably, and even those faded in and out depending on which curve you were on. The heater worked fine on the driver's side. The passenger side blew lukewarm at best. I kept a travel mug of coffee in the cup holder and a flashlight in the door pocket, and that was pretty much my setup. October in those mountains gets cold. Not bitterly, not yet, but cold enough that by midnight the temperature had usually dropped into the low 40s. There was often mist in the lower sections of the road, the kind that sits right at hood level and makes your headlights scatter. On clear nights, you could see the ridgeline against the sky, and it was honestly beautiful in a severe, indifferent kind of way. I want to be clear about what that drive felt like on a normal night, because I need you to understand the baseline before I describe what started happening. Normal was quiet. Normal was the hiss of tires on damp asphalt. Normal was whatever country or classic rock station faded in and out while I drove, the signal cutting whenever I dipped into a valley and returning when I climbed again. Normal was seeing maybe 2 or 3 other vehicles the entire drive. A logging truck sometimes. Occasionally a late commuter sedan. The road was mine, essentially, and for the first 3 weeks of that job, I didn't mind that at all. Mile marker 27 is roughly 18 minutes into the westbound leg. It sits at the bottom of a long, gradual descent, just before the road bends left and starts climbing again. There's a small gravel pullout there, wide enough for maybe 2 vehicles. Forestry Service uses it, I think, or used to. There's a low concrete barrier on the right side, and on the left, the tree line comes in close. 30 feet from the road, maybe less. I know exactly where it is. I will always know exactly where it is. The first time anything happened, it was a Wednesday. I remember because I was counting down my days off, which were Thursday and Friday that week, and I was thinking about sleeping for 10 hours straight. It was 11:47. I had the radio on, something with a lot of guitar and not enough signal. And right as my headlights swept over the mile marker sign, that white reflective 27, the radio cut out. Not static, not fade, cut, like someone had pulled a plug. The silence was so sudden it felt physical, like pressure dropping. I glanced at the radio display. It was still lit. The station number was still there, but the audio was just gone. I reached over and turned the volume knob up, then down, then hit the scan button. Nothing. I switched to AM. Nothing there either. I turned it off and back on. Silence. And then, about 8 seconds later, I counted, because my brain does that. The radio came back. Same station. Same song. Mid-lyric. Like it had never stopped. I remember thinking, dead zone. Radio dead zone. Made complete sense. These mountains were full of them. I'd driven through dozens of spots where the signal dropped for a few seconds. This was just a sharper version of that. I didn't think about it again that night. The second time it happened was 2 nights later. Same spot, same mile marker. The radio cut out, held silence for what felt like 10 or 11 seconds, then returned. This time I noticed I was gripping the steering wheel harder than I needed to. I noticed that the mist on the road seemed thicker right there, in that specific dip. I noticed that my headlights seemed to reach less far than usual, like the darkness was absorbing them differently. And I noticed, and this is where I started to feel the first edge of something uncomfortable, that in the silence, I could hear my own breathing. I'm not saying that like it's dramatic. I'm saying it because that detail lodged itself somewhere in me. The silence wasn't just the absence of music. It was the absence of everything. No road noise, no wind, no engine hum. For those few seconds, sitting in that van at that specific point on that road, the world seemed to go completely, impossibly quiet. That didn't really make sense. The engine doesn't stop. The tires don't stop. Sound doesn't just stop. But I rationalized it. Acoustics, maybe. Some quirk of the terrain where the hillside and the tree line create a kind of pocket that dampened sound. I'd read something once about how certain forest configurations could do that. I convinced myself that was it. I drove on. I made my delivery. I came back. By the time I got home that night, I had mostly stopped thinking about it. The third week is when it stopped being easy to rationalize. It was a Tuesday, cold enough that I'd worn a heavier jacket. I came down that long descent and past a mile marker and the radio cut out. I was almost expecting it by then. But this time in the silence, I saw something in the gravel Pullout. A car, parked, which on its own was not strange. People pulled off on that road sometimes. Hikers who'd misjudged the time. Couples. Whoever. I slowed slightly as I passed it, the way you do. It was a dark-colored sedan, older, no lights on. And as my headlights swept across it, I saw that there was someone in the driver's seat, just sitting there, in the dark, in the cold, at midnight. The person wasn't moving. Wasn't on their phone. There was no screen glow. Just sitting, facing forward, in a parked car with no lights on at the bottom of a mountain highway in the middle of the night. I kept driving. I told myself, break down, probably waiting for a tow, or tired, pulled over to rest, or just someone with a reason I didn't know about. There are 100 explanations for a person sitting in a parked car. But I thought about it for the rest of the drive. And on the way back, about 40 minutes later, I slowed when I got to that Pullout. The car was gone. I stopped for a moment, Just stopped in the road and looked at the gravel. My headlights lit it clearly. The pullout was empty, which was fine, which made sense. A tow had come, or they'd driven off on their own. Whatever. Except when I looked at the gravel, I couldn't see tire marks. The surface looked undisturbed. That bothered me more than it should have. Gravel doesn't always show tracks, especially if someone pulls out slowly. I knew that, but something in me had already shifted, and I couldn't fully shift it back. The next disturbance came 4 nights later, and it was worse. I was westbound again, coming down the descent. Radio cut out at the marker like clockwork, and in the silence I heard, or I thought I heard, something strike the side of the van. Not a rock, not a branch, something deliberate, one impact against the rear passenger panel. A single flat knock. I hit the brakes. The van stopped maybe 30 feet past the pullout. I sat there with the engine running and the radio still silent, and I stared at my mirrors. The road behind me was empty. The pullout was empty. The tree line was dark and still. I waited maybe 90 seconds. Then I put the van in reverse, slowly, and backed up to the pullout. I turned on the hazards. I got out. The air hit me immediately. 41 degrees, maybe. Still, not a breath of wind. The forest on both sides was absolutely quiet in that same wrong way the van cabin had been quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't natural, that feels like a hell breath. I walked around the van with my flashlight, checked the rear panel on the passenger side. No damage, no mark, no indication that anything had struck it. I checked the road surface around the van, checked the gravel, stood there with my flashlight, moving in slow arcs. Nothing. I got back in the van. I sat there for maybe a minute with my hands on the wheel, and I told myself, debris from the road. A stone kicked up at just the right angle. The acoustics in the cargo area made it sound like an impact when it was just road noise. But the road noise had been silent. The whole world had been silent. I pulled out and kept driving. I didn't stop again. That was the first night. I took a different route home, a longer way, back roads, adding 20 minutes to my drive, just to avoid coming back through mile marker 27 in the dark. I told myself I was being stupid. I took the main route again the next night, and for 3 more nights, nothing happened. The radio cut out at the marker, held silence, came back. Just that. I started to relax again. And then one night the radio cut out and didn't come back. I drove through the marker, through the pullout, up the next climb, all the way to the depot. 12 minutes. And the radio stayed dead, not on a different station, not displaying an error, just sitting there lit up, showing the frequency, producing nothing. When I parked at the depot and turned the engine off and back on, it came back immediately. Normal. Fine. On the return leg, I slowed before the marker, came down the descent with the window cracked an inch, because I had some half-formed idea that I wanted to hear if there was anything out there. I heard wind for the first time in weeks on that road. Low, moving to the canopy above. And under it, barely, something else. A tone, low and metallic and irregular, like something vibrating, like a cable or a wire with wind moving over it. I looked into the pullout as I passed. There was a shape there, not a car this time, lower, horizontal, like something lying in the gravel. I didn't stop. I kept my eyes on the road. I told myself it was a fallen branch, a log, a piece of equipment left by the Forestry Service. I did not stop. 3 nights later. I'm westbound, coming down. Radio cuts at the marker, and then all at once there is light. Not headlights, not a flashlight, something orange, something moving, coming from a tree line on the left side, maybe 20 feet into the trees, flickering wrong. Fire, small at first. I almost convinced myself it was a reflection, but reflections don't move like that, don't pulse like that, don't throw shadows out between the trunks. I slowed down. Something wrong. Something immediately wrong about the light. The way it moved. Too rhythmic. Too deliberate. Then the van shook. Not a knock this time. The whole frame. Like something hit it from underneath. Hard. I yelled. I don't know what I said. My foot came off the brake. The van lurched forward. The radio exploded back on at full volume. I couldn't think. I was already past the pullout, already accelerating. The fire in the trees was in my mirror, and then it wasn't. I was moving, and my hands were locked on the wheel, and I couldn't process what was happening. Something hit the rear of the van. Once, twice, like a fist, like something running behind me. I floored it. The engine screamed. The tires skidded on something wet on the asphalt. I didn't look in the mirror. I didn't look anywhere except the road ahead, and I drove. I don't fully remember the next 7 or 8 minutes. I know I was moving fast. I know the road was curving, and I wasn't slowing down for the curves the way I should have. I know at some point I became aware that I was breathing in short, shallow bursts that weren't giving me enough air. I know my vision felt strange, tunneled like the peripheral edges had gone dark. I hit the edge of Old Fort doing maybe 60 in a 45 zone, and I didn't care. I pulled into the depot lot and drove to the far end, into the light, and I stopped the van. I put it in park. I turned on every light I could find, cab lights, hazards, everything. I sat there for I don't know how long. Maybe 5 minutes, maybe 15. I never got out to check the back of the van. I called into the dispatch line and told them I was having mechanical issues and couldn't complete the return leg. I drove home on surface streets, every lit road I could find. I took 40 minutes to make a 20-minute drive, and I didn't care about that either. When I got to my friend's place and got inside, I sat on the couch with my jacket still on, and I didn't say anything to anyone, and I didn't sleep. I called in sick the next day, and the day after that, and then I put my 2 weeks in by text message, and I never went back. I've looked up Highway 9 and that stretch of Pisgah National Forest more times than I can count. I've searched for incidents, accidents, weird local history, forestry operations, anything that might explain what was happening at that particular spot on that particular road. There's nothing, or nothing I've been able to find. I've thought about the person in the parked car a lot. I've thought about the shape in the gravel. I've thought about the fire in the trees, and what could produce that kind of light in that kind of pattern, and why it seemed to be in the same place every time I looked. I've thought about what could have hit the underside of a moving van with enough force to shake the frame. I don't have answers. I want to be straight with you about that. I'm not going to give you a tidy explanation because I don't have one. I've sat with irrational options for 6 years, and none of them close all the gaps. What I know is something was at mile marker 27, something that was there consistently, that seemed aware when I was approaching, that reacted to my presence in ways I cannot account for, whether it was a person. And that's the explanation that disturbs me most. Actually, the idea that it was just a person or something structural about the location or something I genuinely don't have a category for, I can't say. My brother, when I finished telling him, asked if I thought it would have gotten worse. If I had kept driving that route, kept passing that spot, kept stopping to look. I told him I thought about that too. And then I told him I thought the answer was yes. I moved out of North Carolina about a year after that. I live in a mid-sized city now. Lots of lights, lots of people. I do a desk job. I don't do graveyard shifts. I still don't drive at night if I can avoid it. I've never fully been able to explain that to anyone in a way that doesn't sound irrational. But I think about that road sometimes. The descent into the dark, the mile marker catching the light, the way the silence came in so fast and so complete that it felt like something closing around me rather than something opening up. And I think about what was in that pullout, in the trees, behind the van. Whatever it was, it knew when I was coming. And I've never quite convinced myself that it didn't follow me home.